The farmhouse held its breath, the way old places do in March, when the mud is still frozen before sunrise, but the ice in the gutters has started to drip. Gideon Marsh had been sitting in the cab of his truck for 11 minutes. He knew because he checked the dash clock twice, and the second time he checked it, he told himself he was being a coward, which was a word he had not used about himself in a long time. He had done 2 tours in Iraq and 1 in Afghanistan. He had carried wounded men across open ground under fire. He had delivered death notifications to families in the middle of ordinary afternoons, which was the kind of duty that did not train you so much as hollow you out in a particular shape. He understood the mechanics of delivering bad news. He had the paper in the breast pocket of his jacket. He had the right words assembled. He had not counted on the porch light still being on. Soot was already awake in the back seat, which was not unusual. The German Shepherd had been awake since the county road turned to gravel, ears rotating forward, the moment the truck slowed. She was 5 years old, black and tan, with a coat so dense along her back it caught frost in winter like a second skin. Her muzzle had a pale gray streak running from her nose to the ridge above her eyes, a genetic quirk that made her look older than she was. She weighed 73 pounds. She had been with Gideon since her discharge from service dog training 2 years earlier, and she had developed the habit of reading his stillness as information. He was very still. Soot pressed her nose against the window and breathed fog onto the glass. If this story is the kind that stays with you, take a moment and subscribe. Tap the bell so you don't miss what comes next. Gideon opened the truck door. The porch light was a single bare bulb under a tin shade, and it threw a cone of yellow across the plank steps and the welcome mat that read "Home" in letters so worn they were barely legible. He did not understand why the light was on. The notification said Dora Aldrich was 78 years old, living alone since her husband Harold passed 14 months ago. It said she had no children in the county. It said she had listed, as her emergency contact, a nephew in Billings who had not answered his phone in 6 weeks. The County Veterans Services Office had asked Gideon to go. He was one of 4 people they called for this kind of task. He drove out to farms and small houses and mobile homes and sometimes apartment complexes in the small city to the south, and he sat with people while he told them things they did not want to hear. He had been doing it for 3 years. He was, by any reasonable measure, good at it. He was standing on the second porch step when the front door opened. Dora Aldrich did not look like a woman who had been asleep. She was slight, maybe 5'2", with white hair pinned up in a loose knot, and dark eyes that moved quickly, the eyes of a person who had been watching the road. She wore a housecoat over a wool sweater, and her slippers had seen too many winters. She looked at Gideon, and then past him at the truck, and then at Soot, who had followed him without being called and was sitting at the bottom of the porch steps with her ears tipped forward. "I made biscuits," Dora said. Gideon did not answer immediately. "I saw the headlights on the hill road. Figured someone was coming." She held the door wider. "There's coffee. That dog eat?" He stood there for a moment with his hand at his chest where the paper was. The yellow light made his face look older than 41. He was 6'1", broad across the shoulders in the way that comes from years of physical work rather than vanity, with dark hair cut short and going gray at the temples. There was a scar along his left jawline, a narrow ridge of paler skin from a piece of metal he had collected in Fallujah in 2005. His eyes were a flat, watchful gray, the color of cloud cover before snow, and they had the particular quality of eyes that had learned not to settle anywhere too long. He went inside. Soot came up the steps and waited at the threshold, and Dora crouched down with the ease of someone who had been crouching beside animals her whole life, and held out her hand palm up. Soot sniffed it. Then the dog pressed the top of her head against Dora's palm and held it there for 3 seconds. Dora stood up. "Come in, then," she said to the dog. The kitchen was warm. There was a wood stove against the east wall with the fire going low and steady, and the smell of wood smoke and coffee and biscuits was dense enough to lean on. There were photographs on the walls and a shelf of painted ceramic roosters, and a calendar from a farm supply store in Hardin, still showing February. Harold Aldrich looked out from a framed photograph above the stove, a big man in a canvas jacket and a hat, squinting into summer light. Dora set a plate in front of Gideon without asking. 3 biscuits and a jar of honey, and a cup of coffee so dark it was almost black. She put a bowl of water on the floor for Soot, and then she put 2 strips of bacon on a paper towel and set them beside the bowl without comment. Then she sat down across the table from him and folded her hands and waited. Gideon looked at the plate. He had eaten nothing since noon. He had driven 40 miles of county road in the dark. The biscuits were the kind made with lard and buttermilk, and they were still warm enough that the honey spread when he put it on. He ate 1 biscuit before he could stop himself. Dora watched him with no particular expression. "You're from the county office," she said. It was not a question. "Yes, ma'am." He set the biscuit down. "Gideon Marsh. I should have said at the door." "I know who you are. Harold talked to a fellow out there once when his brother passed. Maybe that was you." "Could have been. I've been with them 3 years." Dora nodded. She looked at the table surface and then at the photograph above the stove. "You have something to tell me about the farm." He reached into his breast pocket and took out the envelope and set it on the table between them. And then he took his hand away. "I'm sorry," he said. "I'm going to walk through it with you, if that's all right. There's no rush." She did not reach for the envelope yet. She looked at it the way a person looks at something they have been expecting for longer than they wanted to be expecting it. "Is it the lien?" she said. Gideon felt something shift behind his sternum. "You know about the lien." "I've known about it for 2 months." She got up and refilled her own cup from the stovetop pot. "Agridyne Credit Services. Harold had an equipment loan he couldn't quite finish paying off when he got sick. I made the payments for 8 months. Then I missed 2 in a row because I didn't understand the new account number they sent me after the company changed hands. By the time I figured it out, they had added fees I couldn't account for and told me I was in default." She sat back down. "I've talked to 2 lawyers. One told me to settle, and one told me to fight it. I don't have money for either one." Gideon looked at her. "The letter," she said, nodding at the envelope. "Is it a foreclosure filing?" "It's a notice of intent," he said. "They have not filed yet. That means there's still a window." Dora looked at the photograph of her husband for a long time. Soot had finished the bacon and the water and come to lie beside the wood stove. The firelight caught the pale streak on her muzzle. She was watching Dora with a focus that Gideon recognized. The particular attention the dog gave to people she was still deciding about, and after a moment Soot put her chin on her paws and closed her eyes, which was the other thing she did, which meant something different. "He built this place," Dora said. "Harold. He poured the foundation himself with his brother the summer they turned 22. Added the east addition when our daughter was born. She's gone now, too. Not passed, just gone. California." She said California, the way some people say that's just how it is. 312 acres. He ran cattle for 30 years. I lease half of it to the Peterson boy across the road now for the hay ground. "The hay lease income," Gideon said. Is that documented? She blinked at him. It's cash. Kenny Peterson and I shake hands in the spring. I'm going to need you to write that down for me, Gideon said. The amount and the date and the years it's been going on. Do you have any bank deposits that correspond to it? I might. Good. I also need the original loan documents from when Harold took out the equipment note. Everything they've sent you since the account transferred. Any letters? Any invoices? Any statements? Can you get those together? Dora looked at him differently now. You're not just here to deliver a notice. I'm here to deliver a notice, he said. That's true, but that's not all I know how to do. He finished the second biscuit. Then he took out the small notebook he kept in his jacket pocket and uncapped the pen he kept clipped to it. And he put it on the table, and he began asking questions. What he learned over the next hour and a half was this. Harold Aldrich had taken out a $40,000 equipment note in 2018 to buy a used baler and a swather to replace failing machinery. The note was with a regional agricultural lender called Clearwater Farm Credit at a fixed rate with a term of 7 years. Harold made every payment for 4 years. In February of 2022, Harold was diagnosed with a cancer in his throat that required surgery and a long recovery. And during that period, Dora managed everything she could manage, but the paperwork had always been Harold's territory. She missed one payment in April and one in May. In June, a company called Agridyne Credit Services sent a letter informing her that Clearwater Farm Credit had sold the note to them as part of a portfolio transfer, that her account was now in technical default due to the missed payments, and that she owed not only the 2 missed payments, but $360 in transfer fees, $212 in late fees, and a reinstatement fee of $800. She paid the missed payments out of her personal savings in July, but she did not have the fees. She asked for a fee waiver in a letter she wrote herself. Agridyne responded by adding a legal processing fee of $450. By January of 2023, when Harold died, the fees had compounded to over $3,800. The remaining principal on the original note was just under $9,000. Agridyne had sent a notice of intent to foreclose seeking the full balance of the original note, plus fees, totaling approximately $12,800 against collateral they were valuing at 312 acres of Montana agricultural land. Gideon wrote it all down. When he stopped writing, he looked at his notebook and then at Dora, who was on her 3rd cup of coffee and had not eaten anything since he arrived, which he noticed. "Eat a biscuit," he said. She smiled for the first time since he came in. It was a small smile, the kind that happens before a person realizes they are doing it. She took a biscuit and broke it open and did not put anything on it. "Agridyne," he said. "Have you ever talked to anyone there?" "A person, not a letter?" "Once. A man named Dillard. He was very polite. He said his hands were tied by their recovery protocols and that my best option was to engage with their loss mitigation department, which sent me another fee schedule." "What did he sound like?" She considered this. "Rehearsed," she said. That word sat between them for a moment. Soot lifted her head from the floor without apparent cause and looked toward the window that faced the county road. Nothing passed. She put her head back down, but her ears stayed up. "Mrs. Aldrich," Gideon said, "I'm going to make some calls tomorrow morning. There's a woman at the state agriculture office who tracks predatory loan servicing transfers, and I want her to look at the timeline on this transfer from Clearwater to Agridyne. There's also a legal aid office in Billings that does farm preservation work. I've sent 4 families to them in the last 2 years, and all 4 kept their land." Dora looked at him for a long time. "Why would you do that?" she said. You came out to give me a piece of paper. I came out to give you a piece of paper, he said. I gave you the paper. Now we're past that. She set the half-eaten biscuit down and pressed her hands flat on the table. Harold used to say, she started, and then she stopped. Gideon waited. He'd say there are the people who deliver the news and the people who help you figure out what to do after. He said they're almost never the same person. She looked at the photograph again. He would have liked you. Gideon did not know what to say to that. He capped his pen and put the notebook in his pocket. Outside the kitchen window, the first gray of morning was beginning at the edge of the hills, a thin seam of light between the earth and the dark sky. He had been here almost 2 hours. He had a 70-minute drive back. He did not stand up. Soot was looking at him from her place by the wood stove, which she did sometimes when she thought he was about to do something worth watching. I'm going to need a copy of every piece of paper Agridine has sent you, he said. And I'm going to want to look at the original Clearwater note if you have it. I have it, Dora said. Harold kept everything in the file cabinet in the bedroom. I can get it. Not right now. There's no emergency tonight. The notice of intent has a 30-day response window. He paused. Do you have someone who can stay with you for a few days? A friend in town? Someone from your church? I have a neighbor, Paulette Crane, 3 miles west. She comes Tuesdays. I'd like you to call her in the morning. Not because anything is happening, just so someone knows what's going on. He folded his hands on the table. And I'd like you to write down tonight, if you can, every conversation you've had with Agridine. Every date, every name, if you remember it, every amount they told you that you owed. Whatever you can remember. It doesn't have to be perfect. She nodded. Her hands were still flat on the table, and Gideon looked at them. The knuckles large and worn, the skin thin. The kind of hands that had spent decades making things work that would otherwise have stopped working. There's one more biscuit, she said. He took it. He left just before 6 in the morning, when the sky had gone from gray to a pale, washed-out blue. He sat in the truck for a moment before he started it. The porch light was still on. Through the kitchen window, a yellow warmth moved as Dora went about whatever she did in the early mornings, and he watched it for a moment without meaning to. Soot pressed her chin on the back of the seat beside his shoulder. He started the truck. The calls he made the next morning were not simple. The woman at the State Agriculture Office, a department supervisor named Beverly Crane, who had no relation to Paulette Crane, but happened to share the last name, listened to the Aldrich timeline with the focused quiet of someone taking mental notes. When Gideon finished, she said the portfolio transfer from Clearwater Farm Credit to Agridine had been flagged 6 months earlier by her office as part of a broader audit of Agridine's servicing practices. They had acquired notes from 3 regional agricultural lenders in an 18-month period and had applied non-standard fee schedules to accounts in technical default at rates that did not align with the original loan agreements. How many accounts? Gideon said. In this state, somewhere between 60 and 80. We're still pulling the data. A pause. What's the account number on the Aldrich note? He gave it to her. He heard her typing. She's in the flagged pool, Beverly said. The fees they've added to her account are outside the terms of the original Clearwater instrument. The original note has a specific fee cap clause. Agridine applied their standard servicer fee schedule, which exceeds that cap by a significant margin. In plain terms, the amount they're claiming she owes is not the amount she legally owes. Gideon sat with that for a moment. He was in his own kitchen, a small house on the edge of Hartwell that he rented by the month, the kitchen smelling of his own coffee and the morning cold that crept under the back door, no matter what he did to the weather stripping. "What do I need to do?" he said. "Send me a copy of every Agridyne communication she has," Beverly said, "and the original Clearwater note. I want to give this to our enforcement division. That takes time, but the flag buys her some protection while it moves. In the meantime, she needs to respond to the notice of intent within 30 days with a formal dispute of the fee amounts. That stops the foreclosure clock while the amounts are under challenge." "Legal aid in Billings," he said. "Dana Rourke at the Farm Preservation Unit," Beverly said. "She knows this issue. She has been watching Agridyne." He called Dana Rourke's office that afternoon and reached her assistant, who took his message. Dana called him back inside 40 minutes. She was brisk and precise in the way of people who had more work than time and had made peace with the ratio. She asked 4 questions about the Aldrich situation and then said she could have a formal dispute letter prepared within 5 business days and would file it on Dora's behalf at no cost. She also said that if the State Enforcement Division was already moving on Agridyne's fee practices, the Aldrich account would likely be a useful exhibit in that proceeding. "She'll need to sign a release," Dana said. "Can you get that to her?" "I can drive it out," he said. He drove it out on Thursday. The morning was cold but clearing, the sky a hard, bright blue that happened in Montana in March between snowfalls. Dora had the documents ready, which was not a surprise. The file cabinet that had been Harold's territory had turned out to be meticulous. Harold had kept every piece of paper connected to the farm, organized by year, with handwritten tabs. The original Clearwater note was in a manila envelope labeled Equipment Loan 2018 in Harold's careful block lettering. Dora sat at the kitchen table and read the release document twice before she signed it, and then she held out the pen to Gideon, and he witnessed the signature, which was what the form required. Soot had gone directly to the wood stove again and lay down in exactly the same spot. Paulette arrived while Gideon was still there, a woman in her late 60s with a broad face and a blue down coat, who came through the back door without knocking and stopped when she saw Gideon, and then looked at Dora with a question in her face. "This is Gideon," Dora said. "He's the one helping with the farm situation." Paulette looked at him for a moment, then she took off her coat and hung it on the peg by the door. "I brought bread," she said, putting a wrapped loaf on the counter. "You want coffee," she said to Gideon. "I should get on the road," he said. "You should sit down," Paulette said, and filled 3 cups. They sat at the kitchen table for an hour. He learned that Paulette's late husband had run cattle, and that her son now managed the operation, and that Dora and Harold had been neighbors for 37 years, and that Paulette had been to the farm every Tuesday for the last year and a half. He learned that the Aldrich farm had a stand of ponderosa pines on the south ridge that Harold had planted as windbreaks when he was 30 years old, and that Dora had sometimes gone up there in the evenings with him to watch the light change on the hills. He learned that 3 other farms in this stretch of county had gotten letters from Agridyne in the past 8 months. 2 families he had not heard of. One he knew, a man named Ray Gustafson, who had called the county office in December and been told there was nothing to be done. Gideon wrote down the names. On his way back through Hartwell, he stopped at the county office and sat with the director, a woman named Carol Emerson, who had run veteran services for 11 years and who listened to what he had found with the particular expression of someone who was not surprised but was nonetheless troubled. "Gustafson," she said. "He called us in December." "He did? Who took that call?" "I don't know off the top of my head." "I'd like to know," Gideon said, "because if we have 2 or 3 other accounts in this county, Tied to the same Agridine transfer pool, Beverly Crane at the AGI office needs to know about them. They're building an enforcement case. Every account matters. Carol looked at him. She had known him for 3 years, and she knew the difference between Gideon finishing a task and Gideon getting started. And right now, he looked like the second thing. "You want to reach out to Gustafson," she said, "and the other 2 families. With your blessing." She looked at her desk and then at the window that faced the parking lot. "You have blessing," she said. Ray Gustafson had a voice like gravel and a wariness that came from being told in December there was nothing to be done. He listened to Gideon's summary on the phone with the particular silence of a man who had stopped expecting things to get better and was not yet ready to start again. When Gideon finished, there was a pause. "So my fees are wrong too," Ray said. "Likely, yes. The state needs your documents to confirm it." Another pause. "I'm not much for paperwork." "You don't need to be," Gideon said. "I need you to find the original loan documents, anything Agridine sent you, and I'll come to you and pick them up." Ray said nothing for a moment. "You're not from a law office," Ray said. "No, sir." "You're from the county." "Veteran Services, yes?" "I'm not a veteran." "I know," Gideon said. "I'm helping anyway." He drove to Gustafson's place on Saturday morning. He found a man who looked like his voice, broad and weathered and slow to trust, who met him at the gate with a folder of papers he had clearly spent Friday evening putting together, which told Gideon more about Ray than the conversation had. Soot jumped out of the truck and sat beside Gideon without being told, and Ray looked at her for a long moment. "My wife had a shepherd," Ray said, "years ago." "Good dogs," Gideon said. Ray looked at Soot for one more moment and then handed him the folder. The other 2 families were a couple named Birch, who had recently sold part of their land to cover fees they now knew were incorrectly calculated, and a widow named Vera Spence who had moved in with her daughter in November because she believed she could no longer afford the farm, and had not yet found out that the fees driving that belief were disputed. Finding Vera Spence's contact number took Gideon 3 calls. When he finally reached her daughter, a woman named Sandra, who answered from a Billings area code, the conversation was short and unexpected. Sandra Spence had been trying to find someone at the county level who would listen to her mother's situation since October. "Nobody told us there was a case being built," Sandra said, and her voice carried a careful kind of anger, the anger of someone who had been working very hard to stay calm for a very long time. "I'm sorry," Gideon said. "Nobody connected the dots before now. I'd like to fix that." He sent Beverly the Gustafson and Spence files by the end of that week. He sent Dana the same. He wrote up a summary of all 4 accounts in the county and the specific timeline of the Agridine transfer, noting the date the portfolio was acquired, the date the fee schedules changed, and the sequence of notices. Beverly responded within 2 days. The 4 Hartwell County accounts, combined with accounts from 2 neighboring counties that her office was already tracking, had crossed the threshold for a formal enforcement referral to the State Attorney General's Office for an investigation of Agridine Credit Services servicing practices. She sent a 1-line note at the bottom. It said, "Your county is now the largest single-source submission in the case file. That matters." Gideon read that note twice and then set his phone down on the kitchen table and sat in the quiet for a while, for Soot was lying on the floor by the door in a puddle of late afternoon sun, and she looked at him when he went quiet, and then she put her head back down. He called Dora that evening. She answered on the second ring, which he had started to notice about her. He told her about the enforcement referral. He told her that Dana's formal dispute letter had been filed with Agridine's registered agent, and that the foreclosure clock was legally suspended pending resolution of the disputed amounts. He told her about the other families. Dora was quiet for a moment on the other end. "Ray," she said. "I know Ray. His wife used to bring us eggs." "He said his wife had a shepherd," Gideon said. "Pearl. That was the dog's name." A pause. "Gideon, are they going to get to keep their places?" "I believe so," he said. "It's not finished. But the state is involved now and the documentation is there. Agradyne's fees were applied outside the terms of the original notes. That's a provable fact." She was quiet again for a moment. "You came to my house to tell me I was losing my farm," she said. 11 minutes in the truck before you came to the door." He stopped. "How do you know about the 11 minutes?" "I was watching from the kitchen window. I had been watching the road since dark." A pause that was warm rather than empty. "I put the biscuits in the oven when your headlights came over the ridge." He did not have an answer for that. He looked at the wall of his kitchen, at nothing particular. "I want you to come to dinner," Dora said. "Sunday. I'm cooking a proper meal, and I'm inviting Paulette, and I'd like you to bring the dog. There is nothing formal about it. I just want to cook for people while things are still uncertain, because that is what I do when things are uncertain." He started to say he was not sure about Sunday, and then he did not say it, because it was not true. He was sure about Sunday. He had been sure about Sunday for a while without quite letting himself know it. "Yes," he said. "Good," Dora said, and she sounded like a woman who had already known the answer. Sunday came with 6 inches of fresh snow and a sky that went from gray to white to blue by noon. He drove out in the early afternoon, and the road to the Aldrich farm was newly plowed, which meant someone had come out to clear it for her, and he filed that information away. Paulette's truck was already in the yard when he arrived, and there was a second truck he did not recognize. Ray was standing in the kitchen, which was the last thing Gideon expected to see. He was holding a coffee mug and talking to Paulette about soil compaction, and the two of them looked entirely comfortable. And Dora was at the stove stirring something that smelled like pot roast and root vegetables. And she turned when Gideon came in and smiled without making a production of it. "Ray decided to come," she said. "I hope that's all right." "Of course," Gideon said. Ray looked at him with the same measured wariness as before, and then he looked at Soot, who had come in and gone directly to the wood stove in the way that was becoming a habit. And something in Ray's face shifted in the small way that things shift in men who are not accustomed to their faces doing anything. "Heard from Beverly's office this week," Ray said. "She moves fast when she moves," Gideon said. "Said the fee miscalculation on my account is documented. Said they're looking at whether my situation qualifies for damages." Ray set his coffee down and looked at the table. "I sold 60 acres in January to make ends meet." 60 acres I didn't need to sell if the fees had been right. "I know," Gideon said. "That part doesn't get fixed," Ray said. "The land is sold." "No," Gideon said. "That part doesn't get fixed." Ray picked up his coffee again and looked at the window. Dora put dinner on the table at 2 o'clock, and the 4 of them sat down, and Soot lay under the table by Gideon's feet and accepted the small piece of carrot that Dora passed down to her without comment from anyone. The conversation at the table was not about Agradyne or fees or enforcement referrals. It was about the winter, which had been long, and the spring planting, which was coming, and a barn that Paulette's son was rebuilding, and a feral cat colony that had taken up residence in Ray's equipment shed, which Ray described with a grudging affection that made Paulette laugh. Gideon listened more than he spoke, which was his nature, and he ate the pot roast, which was as good as anything he could remember eating, and he watched the kitchen, with the particular attention he had not been able to turn off since his service days, the attention that cataloged exits and sight lines and the distribution of people in a space. And what he noticed was that the kitchen was full and the fire was going and the snow outside the window was bright in the afternoon light and nobody in the room looked like they were alone. After dinner, Paulette and Ray helped with the dishes despite Dora's protests, and Ray's truck was the first to leave. And before he went, he shook Gideon's hand with both of his, which was the kind of handshake that means something specific from a man who does not usually make gestures. Paulette hugged Dora at the door and put on her coat, and she gave Gideon a look as she went that was the kind of look that conveys several things at once without saying any of them. Gideon was standing in the kitchen putting on his jacket when Dora said, from the stove where she was putting away the last of the leftover roast, "You don't have to go straight away." He stopped. "The fire's still good," she said. "I have pie I didn't put out. It's apple. Harold planted the trees in the orchard himself, and I've been canning from them for 20 years, and I baked it yesterday, and nobody has eaten any of it." Gideon took off his jacket and sat back down. Soot circled twice near the wood stove and lay down and sighed once. The specific sigh of a dog who had decided the evening's agenda was settled. He stayed until the sun was gone and the snow was blue-gray in the dusk outside the kitchen window, and they talked about things that were not administrative or procedural, the way a conversation can travel when the urgent business is handled, and what is left is the actual territory underneath it. He learned that Harold had been a violinist in his youth, which startled him, and that Dora had met him at a county fair where he was playing in a dance band, and that he had played until arthritis made it impossible around the time he turned 60, and that the violin was still in its case in the bedroom closet, and that she could not bring herself to move it. He learned that Gideon's mother had been from Montana originally, a fact he had mentioned once and that Dora had not forgotten, and she asked him about it with a directness that was neither prying nor performative. He told her more than he intended to. Not everything, but more. The enforcement case against Agridyne Credit Services moved through the spring. Beverly's office formally referred it to the Attorney General in April, and in May, the Attorney General's office filed a civil enforcement action alleging systemic violation of Montana agricultural lending statutes in connection with the fee schedules Agridyne had applied to the transferred portfolio. Agridyne's attorneys filed a motion to dismiss and lost it in June. Dana, who had been in contact with Gideon through all of it, told him in a brief message that the case was shaping up well and that the Aldrich account was likely to be fully cleared of the disputed fees and that the remaining principal, the legitimate balance of Harold's equipment note, could be restructured at more favorable terms under a state agricultural preservation program. Dora received a letter in late June confirming that the notice of intent to foreclose had been withdrawn and that her account was under review pending the outcome of the state enforcement action. She called Gideon when it arrived and read him the relevant paragraph, and when she was done, there was a moment of quiet on the line, the comfortable kind. "How's the orchard?" he said. The apple trees are doing well. Too much rain, but they like it. The pines on the south ridge." "Green," she said. "Harold always said June was when you could see how the winter went, on account of how the pines looked in June. This year they look fine." He had been out to the farm 6 times since the Sunday dinner, which was not something he had planned. He had driven out once to drop off paperwork and stayed for 2 hours. He had driven out once to help Paulette's son carry lumber for the barn repair he had heard about at dinner, because Gideon had done construction work in his 20s, and the son, a young man named Terry, was short-handed. He had driven out twice more without a specific reason that he had written down anywhere, which was new for him. The kind of thing he usually noticed and corrected. He had not corrected it. Dora mentioned once, matter-of-factly, that there was a second bedroom in the farmhouse that Harold had framed out for a workshop, and that had never quite become one, and that the wood stove in it worked, and that it would be available if Gideon ever found himself needing a different situation than the house in Hartwell. She said it the way she said most things, without pressure or ornamentation, looking at something else while she said it. He drove home that afternoon and stood in the kitchen of the Hartwell house, which he rented by the month, and looked at the back door with the weather stripping he had never fixed. And Soot sat beside him and looked at the same door. He had called his landlord by September to give notice. He moved in the second week of October, which was earlier than the snow usually came, but which turned out to be exactly when the snow came that year. Arriving the first night, he slept in the workshop room in a 4-inch fall that left the farm white and quiet and sharp-edged in the morning light. He stood at the window of the room with a cup of coffee and watched Soot in the yard, moving through the snow with her nose down, investigating a territory that had become, in the way these things happen slowly and then all at once, hers. Harold's violin was still in the bedroom closet. That was not something that would change. The orchard was there, though, and the south ridge with the ponderosa pines, and the kitchen with the wood stove and the shelf of ceramic roosters, and Paulette arrived on Tuesday mornings, and Ray came around occasionally, with a particular air of not having a reason, which everyone politely observed. Gideon went on delivering notices. He drove the county roads in the dark to houses with porch lights on, and sat at kitchen tables with people in difficult situations, and he did not stop at the delivery of the paper. He had not stopped at the delivery of the paper for a while. His supervisor at the county office had noticed this in the spring, and had given him a small raise which he had not expected, and had told him that 3 other counties in the region were asking whether Hartwell had a specific protocol for the kind of work he was doing. He told her he would write it down. He was working on that on a November evening, sitting at the kitchen table with his notebook and his coffee, while the wood stove ticked and the snow pressed against the window when Dora came in from feeding the chickens, red-cheeked from the cold, and set a plate of something on the table beside him, without saying what it was. He looked at it. Biscuits, still warm, a jar of honey. Soot was by the stove. He looked at the biscuits, and he looked at the notebook, and he thought about Harold's violin in its case in the closet, about 312 acres of Montana ground and a stand of ponderosa pines that a man had planted when he was 30 years old, about a file cabinet with handwritten tabs and a woman who had put biscuits in the oven when she saw his headlights come over the ridge. He put honey on the biscuit and kept writing. There are people in this world who do their job and go home, and there is nothing wrong with that. Most of us live and work inside the edges of what we were asked to do. And then there are people who notice, when they are 11 minutes from a door they are afraid to knock on, that the porch light is on for them, and they decide that matters. They decide that the paper in the pocket and the person behind the door are not 2 separate things, that the news and the person receiving the news are part of the same world, and that the world goes better when someone stays to help figure out what comes after. You have known people like that. Most of us have, if we're lucky. The ones who show up not just with the word, but with the will to keep showing up until the situation changes, who sit at the table until the coffee is cold, and drive out again when the paperwork needs a witness, and come back on Sundays when the snow is fresh, and the fire is going and the pie is still in the kitchen. That is not a special kind of courage. It is just the willingness to stay. May you stay when staying is hard. May the people around you have the grace to put biscuits in the oven when they see you coming. May the places that need protecting find their protectors, and may the porch light always be on when someone is standing in the cold, deciding whether to knock. God bless you, and keep those you love close.